All right, so I'm here basically to talk to you as salespeople about how you can help your organizations generate more leads than I think the title was ever before. Um, so I have a few slides to help set this up, of course, in the beginning. And one of them is just showing what hopefully everybody in here is aware of. If you're here at a digital marketing event, a sales conference, I'm sure you've seen the trend over the last, whatever this is, 15 years, 16 years, which is that digital's growing very, very fast from an advertising and media platform. The two types of traditional media that have suffered the most, which you're probably also aware of, is magazine and newspapers. So print has suffered at the hands of digital. Radio and TV have pretty much held their own, even though it's become more and more scattered. There's many, many, many more outlets to promote your content on, especially with cable and every other form of television. But digital is growing and will continue to grow well on into the future. There's something called the zero moment of truth. It was actually created by Google. Has anybody ever heard of ZMOT, or the zero moment of truth? All right, so this was developed by Google about 5 or 6 years ago. I think it was actually 2011 now. And actually, I just found out that if you do a Google search for Google ZMOT or Zero Moment of Truth or whatever, it's going to take you to a slightly different page these days. Google has a lot of money, so they're constantly creating new content on their own website. But this was basically a piece of research they did, and where you wind up on their website today is definitely filled with research. But it's all about telling the story that has really changed since the internet came about 20-some years ago, which is that before the internet, if you're my age, certainly you remember all of this, or near my age, where when we were thinking about, basically there would be some stimulus. It would be a radio ad, newspaper, flipping through Sports Illustrated, whatever it might be. There would be a stimulus that would encourage you to start looking into a new product or a new service. If it was business to business, it would be a new service maybe. And generally or maybe you would hear it from a neighbor or somebody at school or whatever it would be. That would be your stimulus and the reason you would start to think about buying that new pair of shoes, new car, new computer, whatever it might be. And your first moment of truth was literally going to the store, finding that product, maybe actually talking to a sales clerk at that store, God forbid, and you would buy it. You would take it home or back to work or whatever and experience it and use it. And then maybe you would tell your coworkers or your neighbors about that experience, and the word would spread a little bit that way, word of mouth. But obviously, advertising on traditional media was the key way that you were being influenced. Today, it's totally disruptive, which is represented there in the color part where it says ZMOT, Zero Moment of Truth. Now, whenever we get a stimulus, whatever it is that makes us think about going out and buying that shoe, car, or computer, the first thing we do, I'll show you some stats on this, but the first thing we do is we turn to the web. We go in the United States, 90-some% of the time, we do a Google search. And so we start to investigate things that we're actually now trying to avoid talking to salespeople. We do about 70% of our research on a product or service before we'll ever talk to a salesperson today. And so then we acquire this product, whether we order it online now, we rarely go to a store, we order online, it gets delivered, gets installed, or you engage with the services, or whatever it is. And then, when you've had the experience, positive or negative, you've got a whole new avenue to go and talk to people, which is also on the internet, Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is that your form of social media that you use, and you get to spread the word, again, positive or negative, about your experiences. So that's basically how things have changed. So, and the bottom line is that salespeople are pretty much no longer in control of the beginning of the journey, that's for sure. We're in control, hopefully, of the end of the journey, but in the beginning, it's all about the consumer doing research. So basically today, relationships are created with information, not people, unfortunately, for those of us in this room. All right, so that all leads us to content marketing. So how many of you have heard of content marketing? Hopefully everybody in the room by now. So I don't know if everybody truly understands content marketing, though, so I wanted to have one slide in here where I gave you a description. This is our description. This is actually a picture of a wall in our lobby, actually, where we have this up on our wall, so every guest, every employee sees it every day. We're pretty much into content marketing. But it's the art of providing relevant, useful content to your customers without selling or interrupting them. So instead of pitching your products or services, you're delivering information that makes your customers more informed before they buy. And that sometimes can be a really scary thing for sales types like me. I'm basically a salesperson. But that's the way it is today. And if your organizations are not providing that information, odds are you're going to lose. Odds are you will never actually even get to speak to that prospect. So how important is search? I've mentioned that a couple of times. Well, the fact is, this is some research done by Group M. So I don't know what's happening, but I feel like I'm not controlling the clicker. Anyway, I'll show you all three at once. So 93% of all consumers turn to a search engine. Like I mentioned, in the United States, about 95% of searches are actually done on Google. No matter what stat Google might give you about how Bing is growing or everybody else is growing, they're doing that, in my opinion, to avoid FTC issues. It's dominated by Google in the United States, and you all know that because that's exactly what you've already probably used this morning. So 93% of the time when we go out to buy something, we turn basically to Google to start investigating that product. And then if you think that, oh, there's big brands that are kicking my butt, I'm a smaller business or I'm not a well-known brand, even if you're actually a good-sized business, you can also not be a very well-known brand. Well, 86% of those searches are non-branded queries, meaning we're not using a brand name. We're not searching for Nike tennis shoes or a Ford car yet in the beginning. In the beginning of our investigation, we're basically going and asking questions and doing research. And then also you have to remember that actually it's almost 95%. In a very recent study I just saw, I actually thought it was dropping closer to 90, but still about 95% of the time when we turn to Google and use it as a search tool and do some investigating, we will only click on the organic links. And the organic links can be different things, and I'll show you that. But generally, we're not clicking on ads. So it shows you how critically important it is for your information to show up in the natural search results, the organic search results. So buyers are searching for information that helps them make an informed decision. And bottom line is, today, the businesses that provide that information, they're going to be the ones that win. So how does sales fit into that? Well, you have to, first of all, understand your customer or your buyer's journey. And it can get complicated. This slide is actually a fairly simple representation of what it might be, but generally we would pretty much all agree that there's 3 steps to it. There's awareness, there's consideration, and then there's the decision phase. And you have to have content that's ready for all of these things. And so to look at the funnel just a little bit differently and a little more simply, you can look at funnel 1 or funnel 2, it kind of doesn't matter. They're basically representing the same stages throughout the journey. So you have this awareness or this stimulus that makes you think you need something, or like it says on the right-hand side, there's been some kind of a problem, your garbage disposal froze, your boss said that you need to get a new sales automation platform, whatever the challenge is. So you recognize that. You start moving down through the funnel by conducting research, showing interest, conducting research. You've got the desire, now you're evaluating products, and then eventually you make a decision. Sometimes it can all happen online. So another way to look at it is to think about from your buyers and your customer's perspective, what they might be doing online as they move through this funnel. What kind of searches might they be conducting in order to get to the point where they can actually make a decision? So at the top of the funnel, let's just say that your boss or you've asked the team to go off and look for some kind of a collaboration tool. It's actually a client of ours, an example for a client of ours. So they are a startup firm that have produced a new collaboration tool similar to like Slack or Asana, if anybody's used or heard of those products, or Evernote. Evernote's not maybe the best collaboration tool, but anyway. So you can just picture that in the beginning, their problem or their challenge is how to manage remote teams. The next thing might be, we have a lot of millennials, so how to manage millennials on remote teams. So they start to investigate that, collaboration tools keeps coming up. So now what are the top 5 collaboration tools? What's maybe the best all-in-one? Because I see this one has this one has this one has this component, so what's the best all-in-one? Now you finally get to the point where you're actually understanding who some of the top tools are, so now maybe you're doing some branded searches, and the further down the funnel you get, the more you're doing things like comparing and versus, so you might have Slack, you might do a search, Slack versus Asana versus Evernote. And then you might decide, Slack seems like that's the tool I want, so now you want to know how much does Slack cost. And you can just picture somebody, this could take days, could take hours, it could take months, as they have time and allocate time to get through this process. So that's what you need to understand as a part of your organization. So here's another one looking at from a solar provider's perspective. So they understand what this particular persona is that they're pursuing. So a homeowner in their 30s, they like shorter, more visual content. So now they're looking through the various phases. So they have content for the awareness and maybe exploring solutions phase, but notice they have a gap. They don't have any content when it comes to comparing vendors. So the big risk there is that somebody's moving through this funnel, they're moving through your pipeline, but they're still not your pipeline. They're moving through the funnel, they're moving through their pipeline, and they get to a point where they are actually wanting to compare vendors and you don't have that content, you're going to drop out and they're going to wind up on a competitor's page. And from there, the competitor might be in control of the rest of the buying cycle, the bottom of the funnel. And that's something you want to be really careful not to allow to happen to your organization. So one of the keys is as salespeople, you need to help the marketing team come up with the ideas for the content. That's really what I'm here to talk to you about, is how can you help the marketing team generate the content that your potential customers are looking for when they're doing this research, because they're not ready to talk to you yet. So one thing I recommend is you can gather your teams, and in this particular case, maybe in your organization you don't need to go much further than your sales teams. I have no idea how big your sales teams are. It might be a shop of one, it might be hundreds. But the best thing that you could do is gather them together, and all you need to do is ask them one question. If you have to do it over email, do it over email. But just ask them one question, which is simply, what do you get asked all the time? Right? As salespeople, we're on the phone or an email, we're maybe manning a chat. We're getting these questions generally routinely over and over again, but we're the ones fielding most of the sales-related, product-related questions. Your support teams might also have a lot of these questions, but that's generally after somebody has purchased. It doesn't matter, though. I would gather every question you can think of, and you just start jotting them down, you put them into a list, and eventually you're going to hand this hopefully off to marketing, who's going to be in charge, I would assume, of producing a lot of the content that will go on your website, on your blogs, on your resource center, somewhere on your site that's going to pull that traffic into your site where you're going to have the answers to these questions. So how many of you have seen a Google answer box, like what's represented there? Hopefully everybody in the room. At this point, I think about 30% of all searches that you conduct online will come back with a Google answer box. And we're not, as SEOs, we're not exactly sure yet what determines what content might show up in the answer box or not. But the whole message here is just the fact that Google has an answer box now, and you've probably seen people who ask this also ask. That's another box that shows up in Google search results. I think right now that shows up around 17 or 18% of the time when you do a search. If you do a question-related search, it will show up almost 100% of the time. But the fact is, Google understands that people are turning to Google and asking questions. So one of your goals is you want to show up in this answer box. You want to create the kind of content that's going to show here. So one of the things I would recommend as well, so you've gone off, you've talked to your staff, you've listed maybe dozens and dozens, or sometimes maybe hundreds of questions that you're being asked on a consistent basis. You've listed that down. Maybe you already have answers in your outbox, your sent mailbox, which would be really cool, because you may have corporate approved answers, you may have answers that you've written, that you already have content now that you can help and give to marketing, and again, whoever's publishing content on your site. Another thing that you can do to help out or go back and talk to the marketing folks, and again, I'm assuming marketing's responsible for the content on your site, is talk to them about using Google Suggest. This is my favorite tool to use. There's a couple I'll show you that'll help automate this and speed this up a little bit. But if I'm being asked to write an article for another publication, or maybe if I get off my butt and write a blog post for our own website, and I have got an idea, or I have this list of questions that we got from this research that I just talked to you about, what I'll do is I'll turn to Google, and I'll just start typing in that question. I'll start typing in that keyword phrase, or some form of that, starting with who, what, where, why, when, and I'll watch what drops down in Google Suggest. And the reason I do that is this is the most contemporary data you could possibly get on what people are doing at Google. And the reason I think that's important is about 20 to 30% of all searches each month are brand new to Google. They're searches they've never seen before. So this is the best way to get this kind of data. And Microsoft's actually a client of ours, and I was talking to them about just producing content that talks about cost and pricing of their products. Because as I mentioned early on, the farther down the funnel you get, sometimes you actually start here, but if you're actually investigating how much something costs, you're probably a reasonably serious potential buyer, unless the price is just so out of line with what you had in mind, and then you decide, I can't afford that today, or whatever it might be. But even at Microsoft selling retail-type products, if you look at this Google Suggest, if you type in how much does Microsoft, what is it, the first two anyway, is how much does Office cost, how much does Word cost, then it's Office 365, Excel, so on and so forth. They were pretty darn surprised that people would turn to Google to find out how much a reasonably low-cost retail product cost. But look, this is what we're doing. In another instance, because I do think you want to produce content that talks about costing and pricing, I just showed that if you want to use this tool, you insert an asterisk, and Google will come back and tell you what's most frequently filled in. For some of us here, the fact that number one is a good one. How much does a website cost? The other three, maybe not so proud, right? It's kind of a sign of what's being represented in America today. But this is what we tend to search for the most, those four things. My son recently made me a grandfather, and I know he did a little bit of, this is not his searches, but this is what made me think of this example. We're from Phoenix, Arizona, so maybe he would have searched for best Phoenix hospitals, and then you see the second, or the third and the fourth one there, best hospital to give birth in Phoenix, or best maternity hospitals in Phoenix. I doubt too many hospitals know that people are searching that way. I mean, if they do, they need to create content that literally has that title in it and talk about that. And be willing to talk about your competitors and maybe list them in that content. We also do some work for Home Depot. So they told me about some categories they were interested in. So I did a little, and this is just one of the slides that we showed them, but they asked about maintaining backyards. So I did a little Google Suggest on low maintenance backyard. You can easily imagine low maintenance backyard ideas, design, maybe plants, but I doubt any brainstorming session at Home Depot, or if you're an agency for Home Depot, would have ever come up with low maintenance backyard for dogs, right? Which is Google saying is searched a lot today. And so I would produce a piece of content if I was Home Depot that literally had that title, low maintenance backyard for dogs. Yes? Do I need to throw that?
Does my previous searches...
Yeah. Yes, I'm really glad you brought that up. I forgot. Probably going a little too fast. But that you should use, if you use Google Chrome, they have an incognito mode. So use incognito mode, or keep clear, or sign out, and don't use it as signed into Google. And then also keep clearing your history, because you're right. Actually, if you sit and do this for an hour, you're going to actually influence all the stuff that you're seeing. It's going to try to figure out what path you're on. I'm really glad you brought that up. And then the shot on the far right is just to show you this works exactly the same on a mobile device as well. So a tool you can use to help speed this up, there's actually a couple of them, but my favorite tool is Moz. You can download it from moz.org. They've got a free version and a paid version, and it allows you to enter in keywords. It's got a little tab that you can say, I only want to see phrases that come back in the form of a question, so on and so forth. And I won't go into that too much now, but moz.org is a good place to download a tool. And there's another one, if you want to write it down, called keywordtool.io. Keywordtool.io, and it does similar things to what I just talked about, gathering Google Suggest data in mass. So the reason I have this particular slide in here, I hope this doesn't get too complex, but what will tend to happen, if you go back and you actually start doing this, and you literally deliver, 50, 60, or 100 ideas to your marketing team, or your SEO team, or your webmaster, and say, I've done some research, and I've looked through our website, and we don't have any of this content on our website, on our blog, Learning Center, wherever you might have it on your site. So here's some great ideas. I'm even willing to help create this content. Something that could happen, that we run into fairly often, is they'll do a little bit, especially if it's an SEO or webmaster team, they'll do a little bit of research. they'll come back and tell you that people are not searching for that. I've gone to my favorite research tool, and I've looked to see what the keyword volumes are for that each month, how many people are actually doing searches for that, and they'll try to discourage you at times. And so I was frustrated in hearing this over and over again. So in about one day, our company did a bunch of research. We created an infographic, and this is a snapshot of it as quickly as I can get to it. An infographic showing that if we would have listened to that kind of research and that data, instead of going with our gut and telling us what Google suggests and our customers were telling us, that we would have missed huge opportunities. And like just some really quick examples. I can't walk away from here. I hope I can read it. It's like the second one down. There's a title of a piece of content says, .NET versus Java, how to make your pick, right? So they were using the versus, the comparison piece in their title. They did it. If we would have used one of the research tools out there, it would have told us that Java versus .NET and .NET versus Java only gets about, 390 searches a month, and the other one's 70 searches a month. Yet that single piece of content was read 71,000 times, right? It just doesn't foot. And I won't go into every one of these, but I guess you're going to get these slides anywhere. You'll get this video so you can see it. But here's 8 examples. And I think this infographic goes on. We show 12, 14, 15 examples. And it was just examples. We see this all the time. My recommendation to you is to try and fight through that if people are pushing back saying nobody's searching for that, and just produce the content. Yes?
Michael, is that number the total amount of times the article was read?
Yeah.
Or
Well,
Google?
what was that?
Or referred through Google? Because you can have a page counter that things are retweeted and reblogged and all that.
It was the amount of times that a unique person went to that page.
From Google?
No,
Or just
anyway,
okay.
any way possible. Yeah, yeah, it's possible social media pushed that traffic, but social media doesn't do this. And even so, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's working, right? You wrote the right piece of content that either got shared or it showed up in Google or both. And it's just example after example there of extreme cases where the recommendation, and the reason is these research tools, they don't really know. Google doesn't give this information, so they're making their best guess. And even the tool providers will tell you, they're just trying to give you some estimates and to give you some related search volumes. But I'm just telling you, just go with your gut and keep producing content also, because you're not going to just dream up this article, do this research, write it, and have a success. You need to do this daily, ideally, if not weekly, consistently over a long period of time to actually really see success. And that's the discouraging and the hard part. All right, so here are also recommendations, as a sales organization, that you should think about helping produce and recommending to your marketing teams. And these 6 pieces of content, well, 4 or 5 of them, are usually pretty tough to convince the management team to allow you to produce, because they might feel a little controversial, or why would we talk about this? But you do want to talk about cost and pricing. And there's probably some in here who are already thinking, well, we can't possibly discuss that, or we need to actually talk to the customer before we can tell them what a price is. And I get it. Amazon, retail places, they have to post the price. But I'm a services-based business. And usually when I'm done talking, people will come up and ask me, well, how much does SEO cost? Or how much does content marketing cost? Or how much does paid search cost? Or whatever it is. I can't answer that question either. But if you do a search today for how much does content marketing cost, our blog post on that topic ranks number 1. And if you go read it, we never really answer the question in that blog post either. We tell you about all of the reasons why we can't give you a precise estimate or cost, and we kind of walk you through the process just like I would if I was on the phone with you talking about this. But the blog post works, and it brings traffic to our site. And if you do that search, you're on my site reading about it, not my competitor's site. So think about how you can talk about price and cost as well. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Problems and mission. Yes?
Have you tested for the person who's searching for cost price, that's the most aware buyer, have you tested in that content offering a discount or offering some kind of incentive, knowing that the person who's searching for cost or price is probably ready to buy?
Well, we haven't, because we don't normally do that. I don't even think that's the right point. Right point in the cycle, not the right issue. I suppose that's worth trying, but you're trying to get, and again, I don't know your product or services, but that feels more like an immediate close, where in our case, no one does a search for how much does content marketing or how much does SEO cost, read the article and buy. Even at a discount, generally they're still evaluating and investigating. What we're trying to do is just move them over to filling out a form and contacting us.
Yeah, I was speaking more towards some of the clients you referenced, like a Home Depot or somebody searching for Microsoft Office. They're asking for price, they're pretty far along.
Yeah, they could. And that's more of a retail issue, and they don't have a problem for publishing the price. I mean, they have to publish the price. Actually, I'm talking more about those of you who might be afraid or think you shouldn't or can't talk about cost and pricing. Yes?
One question that constantly comes up when you're doing a verse or comparison or top is how do you use your competitors' brand names or trademarks without getting any kind of issues?
Yeah, that's a legal issue, but generally you're allowed to unless you're doing paid media. So if you're using Google AdWords, you can actually still try to use your competitors, but if their competitors already put a trademark thing in with Google, it'll just almost automatically stop you. It's in their algorithm. Or if a competitor asks you to quit advertising, you have to abide by that. But generally, mentioning a competitor and giving them the trademark in a piece of content, there's no problem with that whatsoever. So I need to keep moving here. So you jumped ahead on the versus and comparisons. But so talk about problems and issues. If there's problems that maybe your competitors are bringing up or known issues that maybe you need to address, you should address it. If you know people are searching for it, don't be afraid to talk about the problem. And of course, hopefully by the end of the article or somewhere throughout, you're talking about how you solve that problem, how that problem doesn't affect you and your business. Versus and comparisons, just like you brought up, this can be one of the most powerful things you can do that you might be concerned about producing. So I'll give you a really quick example. I'm actually already running out of time. But that collaboration tool I talked about, they're an unknown company in Scottsdale, Arizona. Asana and Evernote are bigger names. So what we talked to them about doing is creating a piece of content that the title might be Asana versus Evernote versus, and this company's called Bolst, versus Bolst. So when people go to Google and do a search for Asana versus Evernote, for example, if nobody else has produced that content, odds are this piece that Bolst created will float to be at the top of the search rankings, and it's going to also say versus Bolst, but someone clicks on that, and now they're at the Bolst site. They basically won on the backs of the better-known brands, and now they come to that site, and hopefully they've done a very nice, honest comparison of their product against Evernote and Asana. But the whole point is that they just beat those big competitors, and that person doing that search is now on their website becoming aware and informed about their product and services. Reviews can be a really good thing. You just have to be honest about it. But maybe the easier thing to do is like best or top, so the top real estate agents in New York City. So you list 5 of the others that are your competitors, and at the end, you maybe have a nice paragraph and a nice little image all about you and why you think you're better than those other 5, blah, 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 blah. But you can do that. You can get away with it. You just need to show up. You need to be there, and where you win is if you create the content that pulls them to your website and not your competitor's website. I don't have too much time to go through this hub and spoke model, but this is generally what we recommend with our clients, is you create what we call a hub piece of content. So something that is usually downloadable, usually gated, meaning you have to give your name, at least your name and your email to get it. So free guide, an ebook, case study, whatever it might be. And then you build that, you get it launched on your site, and then maybe for the next 3 months, the next 90 days, all the content that your team creates afterwards, or generally all of it, maybe 80% of the content they create, whether it's a webinar, blog post, a press release, tweets, Facebook updates, all has a call to action, pulling people back to download that free guide. So you're doing a couple of things. You're getting them into your funnel. You're getting them hopefully maybe into your pipeline as at least a marketing qualified lead. But now you've got somebody that you can start to market back to. But this is not a fast thing. This almost always, if you're not successful yet with content marketing, it might be that you haven't done it consistently or at least 10 to 12 months. And it usually takes at least 6 months to start to see a payoff, and usually a real ROI from content marketing done consistently happens at about the 10 to 12 month mark. So real quick, I'm going to wrap up by just giving you a few quick examples. So has anybody ever heard of Marcus Sheridan? He speaks all the time on content marketing, but he basically became famous because he had a pool company that in 2008, 2009, when the market absolutely crashed, he wasn't selling fiberglass pools anymore. Had a store in West Virginia, and fortunately, he was actually considering a bankruptcy. He was talking to his wife about, should we just file bankruptcy? And as he tells the story, he was sitting in bed with his laptop, came across HubSpot, which many of you have probably heard of HubSpot, who produced a lot of great content about inbound marketing. Their content convinced him that he might be able to save his company if his salespeople would help him generate content. So he went back into the store the next day, said, I'll tell you what, instead of us all sitting around here, feeling sorry for ourselves that no one's calling, no one's coming through the door, let's find out what questions that we're being asked all the time. Let's write content around that. So one of the very first things that they wrote was, how much does a fiberglass pool cost? Because that's what people were asking them all the time. And if you think about it, you can't answer that question either in a simple blog post, because you don't know how big the pool is going to be. You don't know what the decking's like, what access to their backyard is like, do they want a deep end, so on and so forth. But they created that content. They basically tell that story in the blog post. You can Google it and read how they addressed it. But that blog post ranks #1 today, still, for all of these different search phrases. And if you write good content, that's generally what happens. And that blog post has generated more than, that single blog post has generated more than $3 million in pool sales for them. They have since become the largest fiberglass pool company in the United States, and they are actually now manufacturing their own fiberglass pools. Huge success story, and that's what Marcus goes all around the world talking about, and his salespeople helped come up with the ideas and actually produce the content. Another one is a clinic in Alaska. I got to go fast, I'm sorry. I don't want to take the next speaker's time. Just advanced, I can tell you about it. So here's some of the content that the sales clinic in Alaska produced. So why am I so tired all the time, even after a good night's sleep? That piece of content that they researched the title on has been read, or at least hit, 154,000 times. Next one, what is BiPAP therapy, the difference between BiPAP and CPAP? And you can just read some of those titles. The fourth one, how much does the sleep study cost? It's been read almost 20,000 times. And I don't know how about you guys, but I don't have a single blog post at Vertical Measures that's ever been read 20,000 times. And this, producing content like this changed their lives. The orange arrow shows where they started to produce content. The green bars are their organic traffic. Their organic traffic soared. It just totally changed this business. This will not happen for you. This is the fastest I've ever seen anything like this turn around and happen. More typically, it's my last example, this is a software company. Come on. I don't know if it's a battery, I don't know. But anyway, so Waterfall versus Agile is a piece of content they created. 92,000 views, Net versus Java, so on and so forth. And this is more typically what you'll see, a much slower growth path. But if you stick with it, you can literally change your lives, because you're going to get more leads than you ever got before, and you'll change the business's life, the people who are working for your business as well. And remember, waiting for it to be perfect is never as good as making progress. Write the content, add images, optimize it, and post it. You can always go back and edit it. 2 minutes late, but that's my last slide. All right, so I'm Arnie Kuenn. I'm with Vertical Measures. We're out of Phoenix, Arizona. We've got about 50 people, about thousands of people in content marketing workshops. And if you want to take a picture of this or get these slides later, you can get a book I wrote about content marketing for free. Just download it at vert.ms/cmworks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arnie.